Within the Marvel films, the plots can be about anything related to the superheroes and their supporting characters. But what some people may not necessarily realize is that minor details or little known facts within the films can be rather serious if given more thought. Certain facts were either mentioned in passing, hinted at, or minorly referred to and never mentioned again. These are some of the details that most viewers don't remember or did not notice within the films, and all are completely official within the Marvel Cinematic Universal continuity. When Killmonger first confronted the Wakandan royalty and noble court about himself being the lost son of Najobu and challenged T'Challa as king of Wakanda, he had bold plans for what he desired as ruler. One of his plans was for the African diaspora worldwide to use Wakandan weaponry to take revenge against international governments for the centuries of abuse, exploitation, degradement, and humiliation of the African people. In the beginning of the film, a narration mentions that when the vibranium fell to Earth in an asteroid in prehistoric times, the regional tribes of the area bonded together to form the nation of Wakanda and to protect this vital, critical, extraordinary alien resource. As a result of this, Wakanda is technically the oldest nation state, most powerful empire, and longest running royal family lineage on the planet. It's said that the Wakandans knew what happened in the African continent outside their national borders during the centuries of colonialism, yet did nothing. Killmonger made an explosive declaration that if Wakanda had been more proactive in the helping of all Africans, not just Wakandans, that they could have prevented the destruction of the ancient and proud cultures of the African continent. Despite the fact that Killmonger himself knows his solution to the problem facing Africans worldwide as a result of colonialism isn't perfect, he believes that blood should be spilled for the African blood taken from the continent. Conversations he later had with Ramonda, Shuri, Okoye, even Wabaki and M'Baku all agree that Killmonger is technically right for Wakanda being used for intercontinental revenge for the African continent and people as a whole. Killmonger mentioned that Wakanda was the only African nation powerful enough to help the African people claim vengeance in any shape or form. When Killmonger confronted Black Panther with this declaration before his death, with all of the facts and consequences known and explained, even T'Challa couldn't prove him wrong. The relationship between Steve and Peggy was one of the first relationships in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and tragic in the fact that due to events, neither got to spend their lives together in a relationship. If the discussion is only limited to the Marvel films, as we would use the events from the first Avenger, Winter Soldier, Age of Ultron, and Civil War, then Peggy did wait for Steve to return. The time that she waited was years, even perhaps more than a decade, before eventually marrying sometime in the mid to late 1950s. If the events from the critically acclaimed yet short-lived television series of Agent Carter is also put into consideration for discussion, then this fits into the gaps of right after the first Avenger and into the 1950s with the marriage, where she struggles with her own feelings for Steve, not necessarily knowing if he would ever return, and possible feelings for another man that she later meets. What's sad is that when Steve finally reunites with Peggy in Civil War, it's anticlimactic because due to her elderly age, she can no longer remember that Steve finally returned to her due to advanced Alzheimer's disease. She later died not knowing that Steve had finally kept his promise to return to her, almost a century later. Following the Chitauri invasion of New York City and the mass destruction caused by the Battle of New York, salvage companies are contracted and hired to help clean up the island of Manhattan. Some companies follow through on their arrangements and deals with no particular problems, and others are started and later taken over by the Department of Damage Control. This partnership is between Stark Industries and the United States government. Adrian Toombs' salvage company is one of those selected by the department. Forced to sell out of his contracts for a much less valued rate, and angered at the fact that other companies are not even affected by the department's decisions, he and his team later decide to take matters into their own hands for themselves and those that depend on them. Toombs and his crew actually managed to reverse engineer some of the salvaged alien technology still in their possession, and later on makes a very successful living for themselves and their families based off discreet stealing and selling of various pieces of technology on the black market or to high-paying customers. Toombs actually steals small amounts of tech from New York, which is still being removed as debris almost a decade later. He was so skilled at the brokering of the tech that only Spider-Man's actions and looking into Toombs' affairs exposed what he had done. But the reasons why he necessarily did it, being pressured into being a thief to provide for his wife and daughter, had noble reasons for it. Especially with the lack of any real assistance or compassion from Stark Industries or the American government. This is why when he was sent to jail, he actually had the respect from the inmates at the prison where he was sentenced to do time in. After Howard Stark helped to establish S.H.I.E.L.D. with Peggy Carter and Chester Phillips, he built Stark Industries from nothing, and for decades, he built the company into one of the premier research-oriented foundations. However, with his death at the hands of the brainwashed Winter Soldier in 1991, the corporation underwent an unsteady period of time, and when Tony assumed control, he shifted focus of the company from research to weapons production. It became so bad that his weapons were being used by terrorists, and a good percentage of modern weapons being used and waged within warfare globally were of Stark Industries' origin. It's estimated that the reputation that Howard built for the company was ruined by Tony rather quickly, and only after his own experience with terrorists does he change the company back into something like what Howard had originally envisioned. But Howard himself was somewhat dubious. Supposedly the arc reactor concept was mostly that of Ivan Vanko's imagining, and the core that powers the Iron Man suits are actually of Russian design. With this potentially groundbreaking revelation in terms of technology and national prestige, of such technology not being of American design but of Russian origin, with the death of Anton Vanko's son, Ivan, this secret is never really made public knowledge. In the Age of Ultron, the Avengers have to fight against the threat that Ultron presented to the world, and decided to eliminate all life on Earth by turning most of the Sokovian city and nation into an asteroid weapon to simulate a mass extinction of life on Earth. The Avengers stop Ultron on his mad scheme to destroy all life on the planet, but the entire nation of Sokovia is essentially destroyed in the process. In Civil War, Helmut Zemo's main intention for revenge against the Avengers is for the fact that he lost his family due to Ultron's attack and ensuing aftermath. It's mentioned in passing that the initial evacuations of the Sokovian people before Ultron launched the capital district to be used as an asteroid were displaced throughout Eastern Europe, later causing a social, ethnic, political, and environmental catastrophe throughout that entire region of Europe. Zemo was a Sokovian who wanted revenge against the Avengers for the indirect deaths of his family and loved ones, even the loss of his country to them. If we were to also mention Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Accords are also mentioned to the American public a number of times. An opinion of superheroes began to grow somewhat negative as a result. and this shows that even S.H.I.E.L.D. can't necessarily keep the image of superhuman beings in a positive perception all the time. What happened to the Sokovian nation and people were so horrible, and the fact that not all of the Sokovian population and entire nation could be saved resulted in the Sokovian Accords, and through the United Nations, every country on earth voted to uphold the laws drafted by what happened to and within Sokovia. The Sokovian Accords have been mentioned in many shows and films owing to the humanitarian tragedy that it represented throughout multiple phases of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In an attempt to help capture the Hulk, General Ross mentions to Emil Blonsky that they had developed, experimented on, and synthesized a variation of Professor Erskine's serum for modern use. The conditions for this serum held that if he were to go rogue, he'd be executed to avoid connections to the United States government. Blonsky later threatened Samuel Stearns to inject him with a sample of Banner's blood when he transforms into the Abomination. Due to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s connections with the United States government, it's easy to assume that despite Dr. Erskine being assassinated during the original experiment that gave Steve Rogers fantastic powers as Captain America, the original serum was never documented on file, as Erskine believed that such a formula in any government's possession could be potentially devastating for world stability or international peace. But since the years of the Second World War, from records taken from the experiment and perhaps eyewitness accounts and even possibly liquid residue in some form from the vials used for Captain Rogers could have been used to successfully recreate the formula. As this is film fact, though never necessarily mentioned in much detail or explained due to the legal film issues relating to the Hulk at the time and the hesitation to put the character into another solo film during the first 3 phases of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The details surrounding the remastered Super Soldier Serum in the films were never really resolved or would be answered in methods that screenwriters or Marvel officials originally desired to explain for film audiences. In Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Ego is revealed as Star-Lord's father. He later reveals to Peter that in his eons of traveling the universe, he planted seeds across countless worlds in an attempt to create new extensions or versions of himself, meaning that he met, seduced, and impregnated countless females of various species, but killed the women later on after they had given birth, and also murdered the children when they failed to access the celestial power within them for various reasons. Ego argued that he was a literal cosmic god that could do whatever he wanted, and lesser life forms, as he referred to, were mortals and completely disposable. Countless female beings and children were slaughtered by Ego in his pursuit for a true heir or heirs. This endless cycle of madness was only and finally brought to an end when the Guardians of the Galaxy helped Peter to avenge his mother's death and all of his slain siblings. After dying in 1972, the preserved consciousness of Arnim Zola mentions to Captain Rogers and Agent Romanoff that after the Second World War ended and shortly after S.H.I.E.L.D. was established, Hydra, to avoid complete destruction by the Allied powers following the end of the war, those that managed to evade capture attempted to secretly join and infiltrate the American government. It's mentioned that the whole industrial military complex that now dominates American foreign policy is actually Hydra attempting to infiltrate and destabilize governments across the world. Key senators and politicians were revealed as being in fact loyal to Hydra rather than the American government or people, and the entire government may be compromised to various degrees of access to critical information, military command, foreign relations, and public trust. Though Captain America and his allies rout out various Hydra agents, there's no guarantee that all of the threats that Zola mentioned were completely removed from the United States government.